Hello and welcome to our second Tech Talk in 2023. And today I have a special guest here. Prasanna will give us some insights into DeFi Meta Chain. I think a lot of you are waiting for it, similar to me. Have no clue what he will present. So I'm looking forward to this episode. But before we start, please give us a like, subscribe to the channel and click the bell button so that you will not miss any further show here. And with this, I would like to welcome Prasanna. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Hi, Dizzy. Thank you so much. It's been a very, very, very long time.
Right, it was a long time. You were really, really busy, working hard in the background. And yeah, that's the format here, showing the people what you're working on, because you're not sitting somewhere and just waiting. You are always productive. And yeah, that's the Tech Talk. Great to have you here on stage as a single guest. Yeah, you're the only one. So you will now rock the DeFi Meta Chain show here and give us some details.
Thank you, Dizzy. So I think the whole DeFiChain team has been there's been a lot of work that's been going on, putting together so many different things. But yeah, I do get the privilege of, just showcasing a little bit of it. So, all right, let's get started. It's going to be a small talk, but we'll just kind of start over with what is it that we're actually building, and then how it's going to look like.
So
All
should
right,
I
I'm.
go to the screen share?
Yeah, I think let's go to the screen share, and then we'll sort of start.
Cool. Here you are.
Okay, great. All right. So DeFi chain. I think one of the very recently, just a couple of weeks ago, I shared a small little snippet on what's going on under the hood. So this is going to be very specific to DeFi chain EVM. So DevNet, it was planned for getting it this week, last week, but I think we're probably running a little bit late on that. To by the end of this week, we'll have the DevNet up and running. Currently, it's there in very broken forms that the team is testing, bringing everything together. So there's too many things that are going on. And then right after that, next week, the idea is we'll have a version of that as a part of an isolated testnet. And yeah, the team coined the word floppynet. Basically, the idea is that it's going to flip flop because that's not the testnet that you want to get on. If you don't mind it actually, rolling back, it's going to be very early preview of EVM, and people actually are getting early feedback. It's just a way to get early feedback, see what's working, if there was anything else that's not, get that, and then testnet. We're actually aggressively planning that. We're fairly confident that we'll have most of the pieces in place. So in about a week from then, we'll have testnet. And then mainnet is going to be, after we go through all of the testing, once we're actually confident and community has enough time to test, understand how everything is working. So that's basically what this is. Just a quick overview. And then now to the big question that's kind of there: what is MetaChain? Right. So there's this EVM that we've been talking about, and then MetaChain. Funny enough, I think Yuzen already touched on various parts of this. But what people might not have perhaps expected is how soon some of them actually already come into plan. So what is MetaChain? To sort of, before we get into that, let's kind of take a little bit of a step back. And then if you look at the blockchain ecosystem today, right? So you have, Bitcoin is kind of the mother or father of all the blockchains today. And then even in Bitcoin, if you see, you now have Lightning Network, you have ordinals, and there's some exciting things that are going on even inside Bitcoin land. And then, a little bit orthogonal to that, you have a whole state machine, which is Ethereum. And then again, you have a whole bunch of other ones, Polkadot, which then took both of these and then said, okay, we want to be a platform on which chains can actually build. And then, so there are similar projects as well. And then there are also, other ones like Solana and whatnot. So now, what is MetaChain is, at the end of the day, right? If you like all of these chains now together, they've all tried different approaches, and they all do something quite well, and then there is value individually in either of them. And Polkadot, for instance, they thought, okay, one of from my understanding, some of their approaches let people actually build complete blockchains on this framework and then connect into Polkadot, right? So, which has a very thriving ecosystem. But then now, if you look at all of these chains itself, not there is not a single one aspect that connects all of them together. For people to go in and out of all of them, usually it is some kind of, you either go through a central exchange, or you either go through some sort of bridges. And bridges as well, usually bridges are only as secure as the kind of smart contract constructs that you have. And it's also, if you look at it, bridges can be built in a certain way where within a certain ecosystem it's well secure. It's you can Security is something you can reasonably look at. And however, if you sort of zoom out and then start looking at completely different chains, how do you connect all of them together is always a different question, right? Now, this is not a new problem. This is a problem that everybody has been looking at for quite a while. And then Chainlink was one of the things that actually does it very well. So Chainlink is a layer 2 solution where it used to just work with EVM based chains. And then Chainlink was about providing this Oracle data, but it's still, Oracle data, which is pulled and then it's sort of fed in to all of these chains, and people can use that to in some manner achieve some sort of consensus. But then again, like Chainlink, it is, at the end of the day, it's an Oracle system that goes into the network, right? So you're sort of limited to that. Now, what DeFi Meta Chain is about is, okay, instead of all of this, what if the chain itself is able to see all of these chains as it runs along? So along with Bitcoin in the future, so you have DeFiChain, which is something you can start running alongside Bitcoin. So this is a full node of DeFiChain node will have a shard which runs along with Bitcoin. And then you can have another DeFiChain node that runs along with an actual Ethereum node, and another one with Polkadot and something else, right? So at the end of the day, it is a chain that continuously runs along with all of these other chains. This is something that parts of the network can run with Bitcoin, part of the network can run with Ethereum, and then DeFiChain by itself is going to still continue to run, right? So, and it is something that kind of connects all of these worlds together. This is the kind of motivation behind what MetaChain actually is going to be, right? So now if you start doing it this way, then suddenly you have, you're now able to see all of these chains, but then, what does that actually mean, right? What does it mean to have all of these various different shards? Now to me, I think it's an open question. I'm actually going to leave it there because I think it's today, nothing actually provides that capability. And if you have that capability, it builds a whole new category of things. Off the top of my head, for instance, let's say you take atomic swap that we have today, right? Atomic swap, at the end of the day, the whole industry uses the term atomic swap. But then if you really think about it, it's not really atomic at all. What atomics in computer science basically refers to you being able to do some kind of an operation on a single unit, right? So there is no multi-phases that is involved. It's either it's this state or that state, right? So that's where the term atomic still comes from. Atoms are the fundamental units. You can't break that down further, right? And then so atomics, well, that's what it actually meant. But then in the crypto industry, atomic swap is really not really atomic if you think about it, because usually it's about on one chain, so you're parking the funds or tokens somewhere, and then on the other chain you'll have to, there's some kind of a bidding process, or the protocol kind of negotiates between two chains. It's a multi-stage negotiation, more like it. It's not really atomic at all. But with today's technology, there is no way to atomically do something, because at the end of the day, how can one chain trust another chain's information, right? Unless and otherwise, both chains are actually running together. right? Unless they're doing that, you will have to rely on some other provider. Even so, let's
Mm.
say Chainlink is an Oracle provider, right? So you have to rely on somebody else. Now, if you are able to run a chain along with other chains and the protocol can support it natively, now the chain basically just sees everything. Oops, sorry. So now chain basically sees all of the things that's actually happening. So which means you can write contracts that crosses boundaries, take assumptions from all of these boundaries, and be able to achieve consensus reliably. So DeFi chain, one simple use case would be it becomes the trustless bridge, because the bridge is DeFi chain in a manner of speaking, right? So that's a small use case, but then that is a use case it can do very well if you are looking at all of the chains together. Because today you'll have to trust some kind of a contract, trust that a contract is written well, trust that a central party is doing it. But then now it's just a part of the chain's consensus itself. So hopefully this kind of gives paints a picture on how some of us are thinking about it, and then where we are slowly heading towards. Now, that being said, the common question is, where are we today? Now, this being the larger arc of the story, now I just want to, sort of come back down on what we are currently where we are. Currently, we native DeFi is what we had, and then now we are in the second phase, which is native DeFi. People can whatever or the native protocol functions, they can directly use it, but that's about it. And then EVM is the next phase. So now you actually have programmability, and people can use that to build or ideate what they want. And then the last piece of the puzzle is that cross-chain protocol. So that is something that we're still working. We've just scratched the surface on it, and we're still researching on how is it that we're actually coming along. But more information on that we'll share as we come along. But now the focus is going to be right in the middle. That's currently where we are. So coming back to sort of EVM, very, very quick high level overview on how we're doing EVM. If we sort of jump back to it, today we have UTXOs, and then you have tokens, and then so you have the native VM. So that is it's Bitcoin transactions that work with DeFi chain transactions, and this can sort of work with these two layers. And then with EVM, what kind of happens is UTXO still remains the same; it is completely untouched. This is the token system. Now the token system, it can pass between both EVM and then DVM. For the initial aspect, it's going to be, we're not actually going to have, the tokens are just going to be limited to native. And then on the EVM side, it has to be exposed as ERC20s, but we're still working out that aspect. It's not going to be a part of testnet. Testnet is going to be, you have your DeFi chain tokens, and then you can move them. Native DeFi, you can move them to EVM and then back and forth. However, every other token, it is there could be a wrapped version of it, or the native tokens will themselves be exposed as EVM, but it's not happening for testnet. But before mainnet, around that point in time, we'll have more details on how we are exposing that token there. Then, but the way that we are approaching it already is part of the larger story is that basically EVM is just another VM. So it's token part, EVM might have access to it, but then there could be theoretically any other VM that could be a part of it. And then tokens, whether or not opt into it, that's basically the layers that everything else can sit on. But UTXO at the end of the day is just going to be DeFi chain native and then nothing else. So that being said, so the way it's actually being done, so today BTC compatible TXs, all of DeFi chain transactions are BTC compatible transactions. And then DeFi chain transactions, the way they are a little bit different is basically they're just stuffed into BTC TXs. So you have the outer Bitcoin transactions, and then in between that, there's DeFi chain transaction data, and this data is interpreted by DeFi chain in a different way, right? So that is what happens today. And then how this XVM, or rather for the very first step, just EVM transactions, how they're going to look like is they're going to look like pretty much exactly the same, except inside DeFi chain transaction, there's going to be another layer, right? So, which is this XVM layer where you can theoretically fit in any sort of transaction in there. So the entire of Ethereum transaction is going to be inside that. And this is going to be basically stripped off and then passed on to EVM to process, EVM inside DeFi chain to process. I'll get into a little bit more of the details on that, but this is the very high level idea and how basically the EVM aspect is going to be handled in. So, yep, essentially, so that XVM, and then eventually what we're also going to be doing is the DeFi chain native VM is just going to be another VM. It's also not going to have any sort of the current special treatment, but it's going to play the treatment is that it's going to play the role it's going to have is basically it becomes the arbiter between all of these other VMs. So let's say you have UTXO. This is the only one that can bring UTXO and then provide it as a token form to any other VMs. So that's kind of the very rough story on how this is going to work. Um, and then, yeah, so that's, let me actually just stop sharing and then
Mm-hmm.
first, maybe we can, if there is any questions, I can take them. Otherwise, I'll kind of jump into a little bit more of the technical details on this, how this is going to
There
work.
were two questions. One was regarding the block time. Let me share here. Is the reduction of block time still intended?
Yes, eventually, but that's not going to be a part of the early testnet
Mm-hmm.
because the testnet's going to first enable EVM to actually work, and then we will because we already have there's for people who are technical and then who kind of follow the repository and changes. There is already a PR that's been there for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, we don't want to just club it along with EVM.
Yeah.
We want to first test it, see how the consensus actually operates, ensures that everything is as expected before we roll that out. So the block time rollout, I think, is going to take a little bit longer. However, first priority is just to enable people to actually build on top of it.
Yeah.
And then it's going to be about, okay, how can you improve your experience of building it? And as a user as well, that should also,
Mm-hmm.
block time is an important thing that we are looking at, but it's probably, there are quite a lot of high level things now that we're looking at, which is so EVM is going to be the highest priority. And then immediately after that comes well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a good idea to not mix it up and first roll out the one thing and test it and let it run and then change the next thing and not both together, right? Second question, I have no clue. YT logarithms. So if this is comparable to DeFi Meta Chain, I have no idea about this project.
I'm actually not aware of it, so sorry, I don't think I can help there.
Okay, then we cannot answer it. Sorry for that. Good, that were the questions so far. Then we can jump back to your second screen share if you like.
Yep, sure. All right. Let's see. Okay. All right. So what we'll sort of with, we'll kind of just look at um, how the overall flow is going to look like in terms of from a MetaMask user point of view, or even from a DeFi chain point of view. So basically, today, what you kind of have is the node, sort of the high level. This is kind of the node, and then something outside. So if you look at the node today, most people interact with the node using what is the JSON APIs. So we have the DFI JSON RPC port. So that's usually like most of people interacting with the node is actually using RPCs. This one. There's also another one, which is this message queue called 0MQ, but as I'm not aware of anybody that's who's actively using it, but that's also there. However, these were the existing mechanisms, which is very similar to how Bitcoin is built, and the same, very similar interfaces. That's currently what we're using today. And then now with EVM, there is another additional layers. One is we have implemented all of the Ethereum JSON RPCs in what is called, it's going to be another completely separate port that's exposed. And this port is sitting on top of what's a gRPC implementation. It's basically another server, which is, gRPCs are the ones that are used across most, like it's usually the communication channel for not just on the blockchain side. Now Ethereum has started picking it up, but then for years and years, these are also the companies like Google, Uber, Microsoft internally. These are how APIs sort of talk to each other. So we're slowly abstracting that out. The whole idea being eventually all of these APIs become outside of the node repository itself. Because today, in order to use this, there is no direct way which you can reliably depend on, because there is no statically typed APIs. So which is where you have a project like Jellyfish outside of it, taking JSON APIs and then making sense out of it. And then, community, free folks are building Python APIs on top of this. So that's more helpful for you to kind of build on it. But once we do gRPCs, the whole idea is we can sort of generate for all sorts of languages right away from the protocol buffers that we'll use. So that's basically a whole another port that's going to be exposed. And this port is also going to have traditional JSON RPC support as well. But internally inside the node, you'll have a gateway which kind of mediates between them. So it's all transparently done. That people can just continue to interact with JSON. It's still going to be the same way. So here, what we are looking at is these are going to be the entire Ethereum JSON RPCs. Everything that you can interact, point at an Ethereum node and ask, you should be able to point to this port on a DeFiChain node and then make those calls, and it'll just work. So from a usage point of view, if you're somebody who wants to develop contracts, or if you are a user, all you need to do is, instead of anything that supports Ethereum or any Ethereum compatible chains, you just point to it and then it just works. So it's the same DeFiD. You don't have to run anything else. You're going to run DeFiD and then point to another port, and that's about it. So now, sort of zooming out a little bit and then looking at it from MetaMask, people usually, have their own, MetaMask has their own key. You'll have the key in MetaMask, and then let's say you want to transfer balance between two addresses using an Ethereum chain. What all you're going to do is, MetaMask, basically you're going to go through the exact same flow, but you're going to point to a DeFiChain node. And then it comes, let's say you're doing a send transaction. It usually hits the JSON RPC port on the DeFiD node, and then goes into the gRPC layer, which is going to have the Ethereum send draw transaction. And then from there, inside the node, it's going to go into what is called the VM interconnect layer. So the VM interconnect layer is the inside DeFiChain. It's going to be the layer that abstracts out all of these different VMs. So from that, it's basically it's what decides, okay, is it a transaction that goes to the DVM, the DeFiChain native VM? Is it a transaction that goes to the EVM inside DeFiChain, or is it a regular UTXO transaction? Right. So it kind of figures out all of that, and then it draws the layer translation between all of that, and then it puts it into the exact same mempool that's there, into which the regular transaction goes, because at this point it's just a regular transaction. Once it comes to VM interconnect, it wraps it in the earlier form that we saw, and it's now a very usual DeFiChain transaction, goes into the mempool, and then from mempool it usually goes to the P2P APIs, and then it kind of gets broadcasted and relayed through all the nodes. So it's kind of the same flow. And then when a miner picks up the mempool, it's going to go through the same VM interconnect layer. The VM interconnect layer is going to now kind of figure out, okay, is this a UTXO, or is it DVM, which is the DeFiChain VM, or it's a EVM? And then it kind of passes on to that layer and that layer will do the additional validation for it. So UTXOs are now completely separated out. Today, every single transaction in DeFi chain requires a UTXO. But after this model, anything UTXO is going to continue to go through UTXO, and your UTXOs are completely untouched. However, for the other, particularly starting with EVM, yeah, DeFi chain will also accept transactions without any UTXO input. And without any UTXO input, what that would mean is, because since we still have the whole transaction, we'll just pass it on to the particular VM to do the validation of that. So here, which is what is the authorization of that, that's handled inside the VM in particular. So now EVM will now do its usual validation, which is what EVM validation is what happens across all of the EVM common chains, and then so basically EVM can mutate EVM accounts. DeFi chain VM can mutate DeFi chain tokens and accounts. And then UTXOs are completely immutable sets anyway. Now, what's sort of important here is the DVM has a little bit of special access, but beyond that, any other VMs that come in do not have access to your UTXO at all. So if you're somebody who do not want to be exposed to any smart contracts whatsoever, keep it as UTXOs, and you're still you can still spend it, and it's going to follow the exact same, sort of similar to holding on to Bitcoin UTXOs and DeFi chain UTXOs at the moment. It's not even going to be exposed to the other VMs. And in a similar way, even EVM state is not exposed to, it may not be exposed to everything, but at the end of the day, this is exposed to your smart contracts. That's on EVM. And but then it then comes the question of how do you actually move across these? How do you convert UTXO to account, and then account to EVM? All of this. So today we already have a whole bunch of account to UTXO, UTXO to account, all of that. So if you're it sort of reminds me of a funny meme where there's so many standards. How do we solve it? Invent another standard, and then now you've ended up with more standards, right? Uh, However, what we are doing is one of the things that we are going to do is we're introducing a new transaction called transfer balance. The whole idea is it is over time going to take on the role of the existing account UTXO, existing UTXO account. It's going to observe all of that, and it's also going to be able to do uh, DeFi chain tokens to EVM, and then EVM back to DeFi chain tokens. And this single transaction becomes the auditable layer for you to move between boundaries. And if you are not comfortable with a particular boundary, then as long as you don't manually move it through transfer balance, your the exposure that your tokens or your UTXOs is going to have is going to be completely contained and limited. We There was a theoretically we could just easily expose and unify the account layer, but we actually decided that we probably don't want to do it because then it's not an opt-in system anymore. But the unfortunate thing is now people will have one extra step in order for you to expose your funds to EVM. So you will have to move it. But eventually on the product side, we can sort of work on this more. The top level layers you can build this singular transfer balance, which can move from anything to anything. Um, so that's kind of the like very rough picture on how these things are going to work. Yep.
Maybe
Hopefully.
one question from my side regarding this EVM layer. So you said no UTXO is needed. That also means that everyone building on top of DeFi Meta Chain must not need or is not needed to have a
Yep.
DFI or something else. Yeah, they can run code as they want. There is no kind of interconnection or interaction with the original DeFi chain system.
That's a really good question. So the whole idea is if if you are using EVM, most people are today used to working with MetaMask or any of the existing tools. So we want to make sure that you have 100% compatibility with all of these tools.
Mm-hmm.
So which means, it actually has to work without UTXO because they will not have knowledge of UTXOs. And that's, in fact, that's kind of the one thing that we do in a unique way where we're able to do both UTXO and work with other systems which are EVM based. Usually these systems they either work with UTXO or they work
Yeah.
with EVM, right? And now the goal is we'll be compatible on both sides individually. So you won't need any sort of UTXO, but you will need DFI because DFI is the native token on EVM as well, right? So it is just like Ethereum. You still have ETH. That's kind of that's your native token, and then you
Mm-hmm.
have your C20s everywhere else. In the same way, here in DeFi chain, you will have to move your token to EVM, which means the DFIs will move.
Mm-hmm.
And then you need DFI because eventually DFI, by what I mean eventually is for the initial version of testnet, the fees are going to be zeroed out on the EVM side. But before mainnet, on mainnet, basically the way it'll work is you will the DFI is the one that you'll be using to pay for the fees. So as long as you have DFI, which is going to be in the usual account form, so MetaMask wallet will have it. As long as you have funds, it's going to be the exact same process, just like how you would send Ethereum to a different address, and it's the exact same way. And speaking of, so Node also now supports Ethereum address format as well. So using the same key will also derive an EVM address mapping for you.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you can generate Ethereum addresses, and Ethereum addresses are from a user point of view, that is the demarcation. So if you move from a usual DFI address to an Ethereum format address,
Mm-hmm.
then you have access to everything in the Ethereum in the EVM land. So and then you move that back to a DFI address, then your boundaries are clear now.
Mm-hmm.
Not no smart contract can touch your funds.
Okay, great, understood. But that means also from point of view EVM today, you can move every code from the Ethereum side to DeFi Meta Chain. There's no restrictions so far, or
No. So the goal is to be 100% compatible.
yeah.
So like early on testnet as it starts, it might not have some functions or the other, but then if at all you find something it's not incompatible,
Mm.
then just reach out, file an issue, because
Mm-hmm.
we do want to make sure before we get mainnet we are completely 100% compatible. Our plan is to make sure every single one of the Ethereum opcodes are going to be here.
That will be great. Oh.
So if you take an application, if you take a contract out of Ethereum, as and then as long as the contract doesn't depend on another contract, because then of course you need that contract too. But as long as you pull it out, you run it on DeFiChain EVM layer, it should just work. There should
Yeah.
be no changes whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I try still to understand this DFI UTXO thing, and maybe that's for me a kind of explanation. You can run it because you don't need this UTXO to run code on the EVM layer. Is this correct?
Yeah. So EVM, correct. That's correct. EVM layer, you will not need to access at all.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, when you move something to EVM, you're converting your
Then
tokens.
in this direction, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Once your tokens are now basically the tokens now disappear there, and then now it's there as
Mm-hmm.
DFI on EVM. So on
Okay.
your Ethereum, you're basically just moving your address, moving your funds from a DeFi chain address to an EVM address. So now it's no longer in UTXO form. It
Mm-hmm.
is inside the EVM machine.
Yeah.
So the Ethereum machine has its own signature validation, just exactly like how it's done on Ethereum.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, then let's have a look on some questions from the channel here. Will be vaulting DeFi chain oracles the tokens on DVM EVM layer?
All right, that's a good question. Thanks, Casey. So the way that this is going to happen, it's going to happen in two phases. So phase one is going to be there is going to be a relay, which is every couple of blocks. So this is something that the birthday research team is working on. It's going to be an open source uh, mechanism where it's just going to be an open source contract where the contract will relay all of the native information that's there. It's just going to be another application on top of the EVM layer. It's very similar to an Oracle where it pulls from the DeFiChain native layer and then provides that information. And people can utilize that contract to actually understand, to get information out of it. That being said, this is phase one. Then phase two is there will be additional opcodes from introduced into the EVM layer where they can access that natively directly from the consensus. But that's going to take a while to start off. The plan is that so the people who use the body research contracts is that the contracts will once this is enabled on chain, it'll just seamlessly switch over to those opcodes. So if you are planning to use those particular contracts, now your application will just your decentralized apps on top will just continue to work. Even when once it provides this layer, will switch over to the native. And but if you want to use the native opcodes, you can use that as well after that point in time. And it's not also it's because it's built as just another application on top of the EVM layer. So it's not just budget research.
Mhm.
Potentially anybody can run the same contract, and we are going to open source it so somebody else can run the contract, so that they can depend on their own uh, the state relay that's happened.
Mhm.
That's the rough plan. Hopefully that helps answer your question.
Maybe a similar question. What is needed for trading these stocks on the EVM later?
That's going to be interesting. So the information is going to be there. So based on that information, I think this is going to be actually up to the community to see, because there are quite a lot of exciting projects that
Mhm.
I hear that are already planned. So it may not even just be how do you trade as a matter of what kind of exchange or what kind of application protocols you have on EVM. So uh, I would actually love to see more completely different exchanges, which are already built on top of EVM, where you can continue to take these tokens and then trade it. But one thing that I want to kind of point out there is how these tokens move. So you can move DFI,
Mhm.
right? Everything else will have to be exposed as ERC20 on the other side. And then you can sort of take that ERC20. It's just an ERC20 tokens that you're having around. So then whatever you can do with the ERC20, you can just you can basically it's the limit is up
Mhm.
to what kind of smart
Yeah.
contracts and what kind of applications you have. And the information on the the current tokens that are there is going to be provided through the state layer mechanisms.
Okay,
Right? So
but
you can retrieve that and then use those contracts to get the information and then program however the way you want it.
mhm. Okay, that would mean we have to create ERC20 tokens for our D stocks on the DeFi Meta Chain side. Would
No,
be
so
this?
the plan is initially for phase one, it is not going to there is going to be no direct mapping. So which means you can only move DFI,
Mhm.
but you can create ERC20 tokens on the EVM layer, right?
Mhm.
So, however, later point in time is when we're going to expose any token you have. Just naturally, is you're able to interact with that as an ERC20 token on the other side. But it's also a question of is that an approach? Do we want to do it? Is it better to have a clear separation? So that is another question as well. So it is something that we're still continuing to
Mm.
explore, and I would also kind of love to hear. uh, thoughts on from a community perspective, from a user perspective as well. Because one of the core values that DeFi chain sort of provided is, you have these UTXOs, and then you have additional layers which are always opt-in mechanisms, right? So now you have EVM, and which you can opt into by moving your funds there, right? So, but should something here just be directly visible, or do you have to cross over that boundary for you to get it?
Yeah.
Uh, Advantages and disadvantages to both of this. So we'll continue to research on that, and then we'll continue to share our thoughts, and then see where we want to go at that point.
Mhm. Then maybe a personal question. I still have the rights protocol in mind, the option trading, which will build on EVM language so far. For this, we have to move the tokens out of the DVM layer, the DeFi chain virtual machine, right?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of information on it, but I, I would sort of expect that once we have EVM upon it, it's just another application
Hmm.
which we can deploy. But like, before we sort of think about, okay, do we want to expose all of these tokens? I think it may actually make sense for just start having wrap tokens in some form,
Hmm.
right? And then
Okay.
because at the end of the day, it's all just going to be ERC20s.
Okay, now I understand what you mean. There's also another option with this wrapped token on the EVM side, so that you
Yeah.
have not to move it really through the borders. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, Another question here. We talked about different layers. Are there any risks for the native side caused from the EVM side? I think that's always a question from the community.
Yeah, 'cause it is a very important question, right? So that's the reason that we have been designing it the way it is, which is you have to opt into EVM, and that opt-in phase is as simple as possible as well, which is basically you taking DFI taking a DFI token and then moving it to an Ethereum address. So the moment you do that, now you're opted into the whole smart contract ecosystem, uh, you know, programmable smart contract ecosystem rather, because everything is smart contract ecosystem. But if you're not, if you come back to a DFI address, then these subsystems don't even have access to any of the DFI tokens anymore. So that's where transfer balance is the only transaction through which you move across these, large. Think of these as completely separate islands. So transfer balance transaction is this only ship that kind of
Hmm.
goes between all of these islands. So as long as you're in your island, you're like, and UTXO is in its completely different island of its own, so it doesn't interact with much at all, right? So yeah, even today, even on the DeFi chain, most of the transactions require you to have things as tokens, right?
Hmm.
So UTXO tokens, and then you can move these to EVM land, and this is also going to be the with the overall abstraction of the VM design. It's going to be the exact same thing with any sort of this subsystem. So it's going to be opt-in for you. If you want to opt in to a particular VM, you can. Otherwise, it's the same DeFi chain with the exact same security constraints that you have today.
Hmm. Great. Next question. How high will transaction costs be on EVM approximately?
So EVM transactions, it's going to scale based on the network. So the idea there is, UTXO layer and the token layer still separated out.
Hmm.
So the fees for that is going to continue to exist exactly as it is today.
Yeah.
And the fees on the EVM layer is going to be deducted straight away from the funds that you have on the EVM layer. And miners will get rewarded as DFI tokens in the very end. So if AVM's subsystem gets congested, then those fees are going to go up. So the goal is the larger picture there is that in order for you to use the DeFi chain native transactions, your fees is going to be much lower than opposed to utilizing pure EVM transactions. But at the end of the day, I think for the time being, I wouldn't worry about it because already the transaction fees are quite low. And like, if that's going to get to that point, I think so we can. There are going to be more options at that point as well for us to kind of consider how we want to go about it. But in the near future, I would expect it to be very low. I wouldn't
Mm.
even think of it as would be a concern for you at all.
So by far lower than on the Ethereum blockchain side, right?
I would expect it's not even even comparing that is going to be it's going to be too high on Ethereum side. So
Yeah, it's a pain
I
on the Ethereum.
it's going to my expectation is that I think it's going to be the exact same DeFi chain ecosystem that how much whatever
Mhm,
the fees that you have to transfer on this side. And like as the scale, because you do have the option here where you can sort of subsidize your fees by going back to the current
mhm,
DeFi chain VM land, right? And if it gets to a point where our transactions are completely getting filled up, and that's a point, then we reevaluate the economy of this.
mhm. Great.
Right now, it's about providing people with the ability to actually build things on top,
Mhm,
right? And then depending on the utility of it, fees going high up is an indicator, okay, the utility is being used more.
mhm,
So, and then I think at that point we'll come back and we can work out some of those details by subsidizing it more on the native side.
mhm. Great. Next question. Does this mean that DUSD on EVM would be an ERC20 token and therefore entirely independent? Wouldn't help the value of DUSD on the DFI side. I think that was regarding our discussions with wrapped token, or should we move from the one to the other side? What would you say?
Yeah, so the EVM side at the moment is, as we start off, there is no such thing as the USD. So if somebody were to create an ERC20 representation, there is nothing stopping anybody from creating any ERC20 token. That is, it's like that's the whole decentralized nature of it, right? So I would sort of expect that people will have their own wrap tokens, even if it's not directly fed in as ERC20. So I'm kind of like, I think this is something that's going to have to be explored as a part of community governance and where we want to go and how we want to figure out what are the tokens that we expose from the other side. It's I would expect it's going to eventually the kind of way it might one possible way that it can go, in my opinion, should be that you can start utilizing on-chain governance to kind of indicate which particular ones that you want to have the same
Mhm,
ERC20 version of, or rather not a version of it, just exposed as ERC20 on the other side. But for all practical purposes, the only thing we're starting with is the native token DFI. That's the only one.
okay, great.
Because it could be interesting on like how people find use cases on it, because people can theoretically just say, okay, no, it's completely scratch land, new land.
Hmm.
I do have pricing mechanisms from the other side, right? But then I'm just going to use this as a complete scratch platform and then do new things with it. That could be one possibility because you can still move back and forth between them,
Mhm.
right? Or you can expose the exact same value on here as well.
Ah, great. Yeah, interesting thinking. Maybe we will see the one or other building on the EVM side, something new, and we can, yeah, learn from it also and improve the whole system. Great. That was all from the chat regarding questions. I think you showed everything you want to show in the screen share regarding current state of the DeFi Meta Chain, how it works. It was really deep. There was also nice comments regarding that's a really deep tech talk. And another comment was, I like these deep tech talks because I can watch them 100 times to understand them without feeling dumb. So thanks for giving us such deep insights in the technique, in the programming side. Next step would be the DevNet release early this week, right? How can we get some information from you? Are you posting the developer teams? So how can the community stay up to date regarding now the upcoming releases, DevNet and TestNet?
Yeah, thanks, Rizzy. And yeah, thank you for the feedback. I'm glad, hopefully, it provides some insights as to actually what's going on. It's quite helpful. And so, in terms of like DevNet, towards the end of the week is when we are targeting, where we have the version where you can use your MetaMask wallet with it, and you can interact with. So you basically all you have to do is run DeFi. How are we on time? Maybe I can do a connect to a
I
MetaMask.
have a couple of minutes left. It's
No, I think we'll just do a. So we currently have it in a very broken phase.
Mhm,
So what I do have is I have a node which it's just going to show the funds on the EVM side. I can connect, take a MetaMask
mhm,
wallet, connect
mhm,
to DeFi. And so it is still, some of the things that are needed, it's in very broken form. So that's the reason I didn't start off with that demo. I would have liked to. But I do have parts of that, and people who are interested can actually, dig into the code as well. And there are some pieces where they can kind of follow. But the high level details on it, we will continue to share as we go. But end of this week, we're targeting DevNet, and then the moment we are done with DevNet, developers, will someone from the community or the other will let everybody know, and then people can sort of hop on there. But DevNet is going to be more for just to bring everybody together in the sense to see what's going on and then how you interact with it. And I do expect that there's still not all the pieces are there at that point. And then, but when we get to testnet is a fully functioning version. So you take any D app,
yeah,
put it
yeah,
on, just works.
yeah. I think that's the start for the community then. Test that. Everyone can do their own things. Um, Announcement will be over official channels, I think, Twitter,
Yes.
Telegram, and so on. So nobody will miss it. Pretty sure that this start shot will be heard from everyone out. Yeah, and then we will see what's happening on the testnet. Yeah, seeing people building really great. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm excited about to see. What are the things that people actually end up building. There are like quite a few cool projects that I've heard about as well.
Okay, just checking again. No other questions here in the chat. Then I would say thank you for joining, giving us these insights. And I would say we meet again in a couple of weeks, and then we have some more information about DeFi Meta Chain, and maybe you can show us uh, what you build or Birthday Research builds, how the MetaMask thing works, and so on, because then testnet is pretty sure running, and yeah, we have a productive system where we can have a look on in a deep way, not like other formats. Great. Thanks, Prasanna, for joining, giving us the insights. And yeah, have a great time. See you soon here on this channel. The
Thank you so much, TZ. Thank
rest of
you. Bye
you
bye.
watching live, thanks for all the questions. And yeah, tune in again when it is Tech Talk of DeFi Chain. Have a great time. Bye bye.